melt is when I'm ocean waves.
Today on UVA Legends podcast, I have Anna Prillaman, a four-year starter for UVA, class of 2004. Anna is the athletic director at Trinity in Richmond and does a lot of great media work. And I'm really happy to meet her. Anna, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, Julian, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have a
of course.
convo with you today.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for doing this. Well, let me give people your biography in case some of those who's out there have forgotten exactly who you are. You're a 2000 graduate of Midlothian High School, where you avenged a loss to Kara Lawson in your junior year to win the state title for Midlothian your senior year, beating Robinson, my high school. And I think that's the last time we've been in the same building together because I was there. I believe you're player of the year in the state that year. And after winning the state title, went to UVA, played for the great Hall of Famer Debbie Ryan. You were a four-year starter, a captain. Took the Hoos to the second round of the NCAA tournament your third year, I believe. You have a master's degree from VCU in sports administration. You have 15 years of coaching. Even before you got to Trinity, you're at STAB, St. Anne's Belfield. I'm not sure if they still call it STAB.
Yeah, they do.
They do? Okay. Atley, St. Catherine's, and not just basketball, but volleyball, tennis, softball. Not even sure if you know how to play those sports, but it never stopped you from being a coach, I'm sure. And then 10 years in athletic administration, including the last 5, I believe, as AD. Recently made some news by having a Bridges of Madison County and Titanic moment in your ad, finding some old love letters and stuff, which is a really interesting story. Anyway, Anna, did I get most of that correct?
You did your homework.
Okay.
You did your homework. You nailed it on the head.
Oh, good. Well, I thought we'd start. I mean, it's hard to really pass up Bridges of Madison County, Titanic, but I thought we'd start with college basketball because we're in tournament time here. Mm-hmm. And, there's been so many great women's basketball players over the years. I mean, Cheryl Miller, Cheryl Swoops, Sue Bird, Tarasi, there's so many, Candace Parker. But something has happened. Women's basketball has captured our imagination, and it's threatening to eclipse the men's game, which is unbelievable.
Incredible.
So that when you played, we would never even imagine that would ever be possible. Something's going on. Obviously something to do with Caitlin Clark. She's a generational player, but I mean, these women are trash talking. Their behavior is something you'd see. We'd see not Jerry Springer-ish, but just kind of outlandish. And it's everything they do. It seems to fuel the interest in the game. What do you attribute this newfound interest in the women's game, which I know you applaud? Is it anything to do with behavior, or is it just the women's time?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things, and you would be like tone deaf if you didn't think that the behavior is part of it. But they're marketing personalities now. I think that especially like on the soccer side, the women's national team would say like the men just get marketed more. That's why they're getting more people in the stands and more attention, and thus at one time, at least anyway, more money. And they're starting to do that with women's basketball. I've got friends that have no idea about sports in general, and they know exactly who Kim Mulkey is, and they've heard of Angel Reese and what's going on with Caitlin Clark and just that beef that they've created. I think back in the day, they tried to do that a little bit with Pat Summitt and Gino, with creating this conflict between them two that probably was bolstered a little bit more than it actually was in real life. And we saw how people used to watch UConn and Tennessee, and that has just grown now. So you couple that, the marketing of the kids, the behavior that, people like watching bad behavior. Let's be honest. It's almost like the sports version of sex sells, right? Like, so there's that. But then on the men's side, it's kind of a cluster right now with the transfer portal and the NIL, and how like clearly selfish the environments are, and how it's not about the institution anymore. And do these guys even care about winning? And look, if you actually talk to them and you talk to the coaches, of course they do, but the perception of it is just that it's not what it used to be. And so people are starting to go back to the women who do care about that stuff. And maybe this is the end of their road in their sports career. So they want it to last as long as they can. And it's really must see TV. I mean, I can name like 5 or 6. I don't watch college basketball that much, I'm sorry to admit, but I can name more women players than I can name men now. And I think you could say a lot of sports fans are general sports fans are that way. So I'm excited to see like how much it's grown. And college softball is the same way. Everyone's watching that in June. It's kind of the lull between the big sports that everyone enjoys watching, and everyone's finding themselves tuning into that stuff. So good for the women. I mean, they're just as interesting as the guys. We turn into monsters when we're competitive too. Let's be honest. Like, it's not all the South and like, hey, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, when we're competing. So let's let it come out. And then once you get outside the lines, go back to being a good person and all that stuff. But I have no problem with people showing their competitive spirit when that clock's running. And obviously there's a limit to it. You need to stay with your integrity and representing things that are bigger than yourself to an extent. But things get nasty out there during competition. I trash talked. I didn't personally attack anybody, and curse words were rarely used, but I thought it was part of the game. I mean, I thought it was going to give me a competitive advantage to get into the mind of my opponent somehow by saying something off the wall and them kind of being like, what in the world? And then your focus is thrown off. So I'm all for it.
Yeah. I mean, I admit I find it a little cringeworthy, and I prefer the austere figures like Pat Summitt and Coach Gino to this, but I mean, I will watch. You brought up a really good point about the portal. And I think, and I hadn't thought about this, but I think a lot of this is driven by NIL and the portal. And the women's game is getting some continuity. So Caitlin Clark came back her last year. She's making tons of money. Angel Reese came back. The women are playing. They're making a lot of money. And there's a lot of reasons to stay and play college basketball. This is happening a little bit on the men's side as well. One of your former alums, Armando Baycott, stayed because he was able to make money there. But I think you probably hit something on the nail on the head there when you talked about the continuity. The men's game is in flux, and we're seeing these same personalities that we saw last year.
Yeah, it's like that institutional pride. I think you're seeing it more on the women's side. And how do you get pride for an institution? You're there for a while. You can't love a place by staying for 9 months and then leaving. And so it's just more likely for the women to stay than the men. Obviously, there's a transfer portal on the women's side, so it's not like they can't do it. I just think these top level athletes are sticking around a little bit more on the women's side than the men. And that could change. I often wonder, what are they going to regulate about the transfer portal? Are they going to take it away? Is this just going to get out of control? Same thing with NIL. I feel like regulation is coming, and people will just know this time, these little 5 years maybe, is back in the Wild West when nobody had a control on it. The NCAA certainly does it. So I don't think where we are right now is where we're going to be in a few years, but let's enjoy the mayhem while we can, just from like you said, from just a purely spectator standpoint, because professional athletics is entertainment athletics. College and high school are supposed to be educational athletics. That's not happening and hasn't happened at the college level for a while. It's entertainment. So let's just take it as that. Do you want to tune in?
Yeah.
Like you said, you found it cringeworthy. Of course, the integrity side of me is like, behave out there. What are you doing? All this and, taunting and all that. But I'm also a person who watches trash TV sometimes and watches reality TV sometimes. And that feels like that's what it's becoming. So for better or for worse, people are watching.
Yeah, I think it'll be helped or smoothed out a little bit when the COVID year goes away. Because I think a lot of people are having this option on this extra year, which they deserve. Is terrible time. But that really changes. One thing that's really changed since you played in the women's game, but also the men's game, is the players spend a lot of time making themselves better looking on the court. I don't want to use beautiful because I don't want to, but because the men do it too, with the hair and the tattoos and the women and the eyelashes. That was something that we did not see. When I played, we definitely didn't see it. Maybe it had started when you played. I don't think so. But the amount of effort that they put into making themselves look good, and I guess that's where some of the market value is.
Yeah, we had to be reminded that someone's always watching you. Because we forgot about that there were always eyes on us and even cameras on us. They know that someone's always watching them because everyone's got these cell phones. and they grew up this way too. They were taking videos and pictures of themselves probably for the last 10 years. So they just are aware that all eyes are on them at all time. And I think if you're aware of that, you probably just want to present yourself better. It's also a personal brand. And to your point, it's a marketing thing, because let's be honest, the better you look, the more the local insurance company is going to want your face on their Twitter account. So it's a business move as well. I'm nauseated by it. I mean, I'm not a selfie person. I think it's ridiculous for people to just take pictures of themselves and throw them out to the public. But all these kids, it is a different world and it's normal to them. There was a while where the transition was a little awkward for some of the kids, like, I'm not into it, or I'm not. This is absolutely how it is for everybody. So that just people doing the lashes and how they look and what they're wearing as they approach the game. It's just a hyper aware of self now. And it's because of cell phones. I mean, and social media, of course. So,
well, as my kids would say, now you're showing your age. You know, if you don't understand the whole selfie thing, and then you know, the problem Anna, is probably with you. Let's talk about Midlothian a little bit, and you getting into basketball. What made you so special as a basketball player? Why were we able to go so far and to be such a good player?
I mean, the long and short of it is it was just a God-given talent. I mean, I was that kid in preschool who, you know, you have to dribble a ball for a couple seconds for them to test your motor skills, and I kept going. So it was something that I was good at from a young age, and my dad nurtured that. And I was always around my brother when he was playing rec ball, and eventually we just played high school ball. He was a college football player, so not that great at basketball, but I was around it. My dad was huge into it. I enjoyed it. And I was that driveway warrior. You know, now people have their personal trainers that their parents are paying $50 an hour for, which I just think is ridiculous. My dad would say, we have a hoop out back, go play. Or how about going to the local rec center? Ours was called Briarwood. I'd go up there for 8 hours. I mean, my mom would be playing tennis, my siblings would be at the pool, and I'd be playing basketball all day, or going to a local park and saying, hey, can I play? And you strangers, just boys that were like, I don't know about that. And then you come on, and the next thing you know, you're one of them. So I just enjoyed being a part of the game in that way. And I absolutely worked on the game by myself more than I did. You should work on the game more by yourself than you do at practice or an organized formal training. And I was that person. I'd get up before school, take X amount of shots. I was very social in high school, to a detriment. I mean, I was going out with friends, and I'd have these cheerleader girlfriends that would say, you coming out tonight? And I said, I am, but I got to get 500 shots up first. You going to come rebound for me? It'll be quicker. And so I'd have friends come and rebound for me before I went out and socialized all night. So it was a love for the game for the most part of it. I think I lost probably that somewhere in college. It does become a grind. Loved UVA and loved teammates and stuff, but it, you know, towards the end of your career, especially as a female that had no intention of going professional, it was like, all right, I think I've done this long enough.
Yeah. My sister was like that. I was the kind of guy I was playing pickup anywhere I can. But my sister was by herself for 4-6 hours by herself every day working on her shots, and then she'd play. And you know, she ended up playing at GW and had a good career there. When you know, when did you know that you were going to be special? I mean, when did a light go off and it was more than just hard work, that I might be able to make, you know, get a scholarship, and this might be something more than just something I'm good at?
Oh man, I think it was at a young age. I mean, maybe middle school, you make the team as a sixth grader, which is rarely happens. And you end up having playing time as a sixth grader, starting seventh and eighth, being kind of the most valuable player. I'd say I was 11, 12, and I knew it, being the best player on the AAU team and everyone telling you that. Yeah, I was young.
Who was the first important coach that you had?
Most important coach, you said?
Who was the first important coach that you had that really helped you and put you on the right path?
Probably same thing. Middle school coach who happened to also be my first AAU coach, Ray Johnson. Just an old school basketball guy that would invite his buddies to come play after our practices. So we saw that he was good at basketball, and he obviously had a love for the game. Pretty good at X's and O's, just one of those old school, like, servant leader type of men. So yeah, I was like 11 with my first impactful coach. I was lucky with my cadence of coaches. Ed Sherrod was an AAU coach of mine. He obviously you and still is at St. Catherine's. And I had a salt of the earth high school basketball coach and Doug Garrett, who was just all in on the preparation. He's a big church going guy, so he was big on teaching us values and doing things the right way. And really was against any form of selfishness. So if you were a player that wanted to look at the scorebook after the game to know how many points you scored, he made sure, and that would be the last time that you would ask that. I mean, big on tradition. And then obviously I got into college and everyone talks about how great Debbie is, and she is. She's absolutely on Mount Rushmore of college basketball, but Audra Smith was there at the time, ended up being at Clemson. Nikki Caldwell, who played at Tennessee and now is an executive in the WNBA, was an assistant of mine. She's probably the best basketball mind I've ever been around. And then Tim Taylor, who's at Navy now, another really great basketball mind. He coached the post players when I was at UVA and was doing stuff that I had never seen before. And then Daryl Oliver got there towards the end. And Jen Hoover came through when I was there, was at Kentucky. So we had a who's who of assistant coaches, and it's a shame that we didn't perform better. Like you said, the furthest we got was to the second round. We got that 8-9 seed every year. And so the first year is against going to West Lafayette to play Notre Dame, won the national championship. Second year to Knoxville to play Tennessee and got our butts handed to us there. Carol Lawson was on that team as well.
Got to see her again.
Yeah, that might have been our third year. The second year we went to Storrs, Connecticut, and we lost in the first round, thank God, because the second round would have been against the team that had Sue Bird, Swin Cash, Diana Taurasi, Tamika Williams. I mean, loaded. Yeah. That place loves women's basketball, Storrs, Connecticut. Right. Oh my God. It was like the president was there when they walked in. Everyone stood up, and it was just a wild scene to see how much they cared. Because at the time we weren't around that a lot.
Yeah.
So to see it going on was really cool.
No, it is really cool. I interviewed Jasmine Thomas. She ended up playing at the pro women's team in Connecticut, Duke player. And she was just saying the passion they have for women's basketball is incredible. Quickly going back to the Midlothian, did Midlothian have a program that was respected? I mean, nowadays, Richmond's a little interesting because you've got all these great players in Richmond that are staying with their public schools and they're playing. And you do have great private school programs in the area. I used to referee those schools when I was at UVA. They come up to Stab, I think. But anyway, and here in the DC area, a lot of the top girls end up going to Paul VI or, Ireton, St. Stephen's a little bit, or even go downtown. And we do have some of the top players stay at the public schools. But with the Midlothian, like today, would you have gone to another school? Would you have gone to one of a bigger private public program, or to a private school program? Or back then that wasn't a decision that people made?
Yeah, they didn't do that. And I just knowing my dad, there's no chance he would have plucked me out of, my dad or my mom would have plucked me out of the school we were zoned for because of basketball. He was the guy that when Boo Williams called for AAU, he was like, we're good. We're going to stay in Richmond and not travel an hour and a half with our daughter. If she has goals and wants to get somewhere, she can do it, whether she's on a great AAU team or what Boo Williams thought was the best of the best or not a good one. So no, we wouldn't have moved. And Midlothian had a tradition with girls basketball that was solid starting from late 80s. Like wins, again, passed down traditions. We had a few big names that went there. Katie Tracy actually started at Midlothian, and her dad was a guidance counselor at Midlothian. So she had the option to stay when James River was built and decided to go ahead and go to James River. That was a big thing for her to leave. But yeah, there was never a question that I was going to go anywhere else. And private schools definitely weren't a thing as far as sports were concerned back then. I heard my dad told me that Trinity wanted me. Yeva Kablena was my year, and she played her senior year at Trinity before going to Virginia Tech. And my dad said, I'm not interested in paying for private school. And so we were happy at Midlothian from a social aspect, from a neighborhood aspect, from my brother playing football aspect, all down the line. It was a really, really good community back then with a lot of good leadership within the school. Now Richmond, I thought for a while the private schools were picking up steam on the girls' side and some people were coming outside of them. I know when I was coaching at Trinity, we had one of the best teams in the area and won the Times Dispatch tournament the year after I stepped down with a team that we had sort of put together. So, but it's not like that right now. The public schools are ruling the roost as far as the big talent is concerned. For sure on the girls' side. The boys' side, the private schools are solid. So maybe it's just cyclical and it'll go up and down, but we definitely don't have the Paul VI thing.
Yeah.
We're also not technically allowed to recruit like the WCAC is. And of course that stuff goes on under the table, but the WCAC is overt about it and VISA schools are not, and we are not supposed to.
Okay. And most of the Richmond schools are in that conference?
Yeah, so it's the state organization for Virginia.
Mhm.
And it's funny because some WCAC teams are actually in that, like
Right.
Bishop Byerton and O'Connell and even Paul VI, but I think that they value the WCAC umbrella more than they do the VISA umbrella from what I hear from up there. And yeah, you're allowed to recruit. You can't reclass in high school, I don't think, in the WCAC, but you can overtly recruit, and they do. And that is not something we do here at Trinity for sure. I mean, we answer phone calls from families and tell them about ourselves and welcome them to come to open house and admission stuff, but we're not going out to games plucking athletes, that's for sure.
Yeah. Richmond's a little different in that even when I was playing basketball, Benedictine would play the public school teams, like the private and public school teams play. They seem to have interchange or even rivalries. Up here, that's never really a case. Like Flint Hill generally doesn't play the public school teams. Only in Christmas tournaments that you'll see the public and private schools play. It's almost like the private schools, they feel like they have nothing to gain by playing the public school teams because if they lose, it looks bad. And then I guess some of the public school teams maybe worry that if a player plays too well, he'll be plucked to the private school team. So we don't have that. I've always felt in Richmond and even Norfolk, you'll see those big games between private and public.
Yeah, we probably have that more than you all, but it's still not the relationship that I'd actually want. One of my big goals becoming an athletic director and sitting on the VISA board and even the VIAAA board, which is public and private together, was to marry that a little bit better. And even, gosh, the pipe dream was like a big championship where we could truly find who the best, basketball or football team was in the city. And it's never come together. Obviously, public schools have caps on their schedules, so they can only schedule X amount of games. We do not. We can schedule as many games as we want. So that's the main excuse we get from public school ADs who even respond to us on emails to schedule is, look, we just don't have any more games, and that schedule was put out months ago. But yeah, you'll see in basketball sometimes like John Marshall wanting to play St. Christopher's like they did this year and some other sports. But I would assume that your perception of it, like it's not as much as you'd think with that interchange. I think there should be more. And it's to your point that I think that the public schools think that the private schools are plucking, and either side, depending on who's better, doesn't feel like they get a lot out of the win. And there's a lot to lose if you lose perception wise. So it's so weird to me that these institutions don't get along better when, like, who cares? We're still educating kids, like, and if a public school kid wants to come to a private school and spend all that money, that's a family decision,
Exactly. Yeah, I think the reason why I had the wrong impression is because the teams from Richmond that I would know about are the public school teams that are doing really well. So they're more likely to have played Benedictine or whoever, Trinity, whoever's top dog, at that particular time. Now you're someone who's coached in both public and private, and you played in public. Is the coaching experience much different between the two?
Yeah, there's small little things. Public schools always practice during holidays and always practice on Saturday mornings. At least here, that's a little frowned upon, which is interesting to me, where they're a little bit more intentional with not taking so much time and the balance of life and academics and sports together. I was appalled the first year I coached basketball here when Christmas break's when you get better. You've got 2 weeks to really grind and shoot, let's practice twice a day if we can. And I had 6, 7 girls at practice. And I'm like, where is everybody? And it's, well, they went to the vacation in the Cayman Islands, or they're just hadn't planned to be around because they went and visited family. And gosh, if you missed a practice during the holidays in the public schools that I was at, that you could be kicked off the team. So there's a little bit more of a laissez-faire relationship with practices during the weekends and holidays, and sometimes even in general with how thin these kids sometimes are spread between different things. There's less regulation, so you can get creative. You can have dual sport athletes, that run indoor track and also play basketball because that'll work, or play golf and also play lacrosse, stuff like that. You don't have to jump through so many hoops to get certain things done. We've got teams that travel for spring break sometimes. That's fun. I don't think that happens as much in the public schools, but the practice thing was the big thing that stood out to me. I just couldn't believe.
Yeah, that really surprises me. Well, you said one thing that earlier, that by the time you finish UVA, and we're going to get back to your college days, and I want to talk about your state tournament run quickly as well. But um, um, you sound like you lost passion for basketball. And then one thing that struck me is that you had success as a coach. I was reading somewhere the first year you got off to a great start at Atlee when you got that job, but you didn't stick to coaching for a long. You didn't make a career of coaching.
Yeah.
Did you have real passion for coaching? Was that something that you could have done for longer, or were you always looking for something else that you wanted to do?
Yeah. I mean, that's nothing I've ever really publicly admitted. I think when you transition out from being a college athlete into the real world, you're kind of lost. Your identity is at jeopardy of being gone if I don't have this basketball thing attached to me. And so how you keep that identity is you stay in it somehow. So you go into coaching, when really I don't think that it actually ever really aligned with me. I cared about the athletes for sure. I think that I was a decent coach, but it never felt like this is my passion and this is what I should be doing. I think it's just all I knew to get my foot in the door, at a place like U-Turn, where the nonprofit that I worked at, or at a place like Atlee or St. Catherine's or Trinity. It was like my ticket to get in because it was the easiest, and I didn't have to fully revamp who I was, from an identity perspective. So no, I don't think that's probably something with all the world has to offer. I mean, literally the world's your oyster after college, with a degree at UVA. Probably would have done it differently. Also, I was burned out of playing, and that probably trickled in a little bit of coaching, and wasn't able to give fully what any family institution deserves out of a coach, because I sort of had this cynical viewpoint on it. I needed a break. You've been playing basketball since you're 8 years old, so that's 14 years, and it's just take a couple years off, and then if you miss it, go back. But jumping right into it, probably not the smartest for the longevity's sake of me as a coach. And I was also coaching volleyball at the same time, right? So I'm fall volleyball, basketball in the winter, and I started coaching tennis at Trinity in the spring. So it's just a grind. I mean, it's a long day. And if you do it the way you're supposed to do, like I've said on a previous podcast, it becomes a full-time job.
Yeah.
Because you got to prep.
I'm sorry.
You got to practice. You got to scout other teams. The conversations are endless with assistants and families and people that need to clarify certain things. And so it can become very much an 8-10 hour a day thing on top of your full-time job. So it gets tiring.
Yeah. I've found that a lot of times coaches that have the best profile are the ones that kind of have unfinished business with their playing career. Like me, I was only 5'5" my senior year of high school. I grew to 5'10", and I played on the JV team at UVA, and I was a good player, and I was a solid high school player, but I never really got a chance to play. And I coached, I think, because I kind of had unfinished business. I think a lot of coaches are like that. My sister had a great career. When it was over, she was done with it. She's done other things. I mean, she's dipped back in when her partner was coaching, she'd help out. So she loves the game, and if she meets some kids and she gets attached to them, yeah, she'll coach them. But just coaching itself is something that she was never driven to do, because I just think she had her fun, and she was really, really good at it. One thing I found in your career that was interesting is that when you replace the AD at Trinity, she went back to teaching and coaching, and I believe coaching, but definitely teaching. And you don't see that up here, like athletic directors, and we call them DSAs. I don't even know what that means, but to me, they're ADs. But those are the jobs that people get, and then they stay there. I mean, unless they become principals. But you don't go. I've never seen an AD go back into coaching or teaching. And maybe it's a public school thing where for your benefit package, it's almost better to retire there, because you can retire young as an AD or whatever, and you have a nice little a better salary than you'd have as a teacher,
Right.
For the rest of your life. But I found that interesting that you replaced someone that was going back into teaching. So there's something about the athletic director job, maybe at a private school,
Yeah.
it's probably more challenging than people think it is.
It's very intense. You think you get into it maybe thinking, all right, I'm going to mentor young student athletes and I'm going to be around sports, so it's going to be fun. And then you realize that a lot of it is managing adult conflict, whether it's between the parent and the coach and administration, administrators disagreeing on an approach. So you really just become a people manager. Like you're at a corporate job and you've got 6 people that work for you. Well, you've got 70 coaches to manage. And then a department that's bigger. In the public schools, usually it's your DSA and then some part-time person that helps out at games, right? Well, we've got 6 people in this department. I've got a full-time social media guy that helps with our little broadcasting program, and 2 assistant ADs, and an equipment and uniforms woman, and then also our full-time athletic trainer. So you're managing people's employment too, having nothing to do with, making sure people get to work on time and take care of tasks and things like that. So I think I can understand why Becky, the AD before me, just wanted to go back to mentoring kids, and she's not money driven, and it worked better for her because the kitchen can get really hot when you are the leader that has to make hard decisions. And like I've said before, athletic administrators and administrators in schools have to protect the idea of educational athletics. It is not our job, at least here, to win and to hang banners. Well, coaches want you to put them in the position to win. That's all they want. And so when you have to be the no police about certain things and reel them in and say, hey, let's keep our eye on the ball and actually why we're here. We're trying to develop young people into good men and women out in society. And sometimes it's not all about winning. They don't like that. And I can understand from a coach's perspective why. So those tough conversations and just always being the one that, families look at and say, ugh, she just says no, and she doesn't care about this. And that can really wear on you just from a personal perspective. Everybody wants to be liked, and sometimes administrators in schools are the big bad wolf. So I've heard that the average lifespan of a private school AD right now is 5 years.
Wow.
It's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
This big job that everybody looks forward to. And I guess I'm hitting the average because this is my 5th year as the AD, and I'm out after June.
So you're implying, and I think you said that it's not all about wins and losses. It's about it's about educating the student body and managing all those people. Are there schools where the AD is basically his job is to especially win in football and basketball and get butts in the seats, or is the way you describe the AD the way it is at most places?
At least in VISA, it is supposed to be that you are the ambassador for educational athletics. And every school probably is going to be different. And that's going to largely come from the head of school and their approach to it. So our head of school is a Renaissance guy. He's an academic. He wants people to care about football the same way that they care about the ceramics program or our Model UN program. He's very egalitarian in that way. There could be heads of schools at other places that are just a little bit more competitive and sports driven, and hey, let's bring in this coach because I know that they're going to be really good for the wins, and that makes the alumni happy. And of course, in private schools, you have to have good relationships with the alumni so they come back and it's a community feel. And of course, they give money and things like that. So that's probably more largely dependent on your school leadership than anything. But again, if you're following the rules of the Virginia Independent School Athletic Association, winning is not supposed to be something you come to work to want to do eventually. And look, I'm a competitive person, so there's decisions I absolutely make on the competitive end, but they're not dirty. They're just, yeah, let's hire that coach. He's good. He's got a winning record, and have to be a good heart and good person, and absolutely know how to mentor kids too. But it's definitely, I can tell from your reaction to it that that's sort of a misconception about athletic directors at the high school level.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I know lots of them, but as a competitive person, do you wish the job was more about wins and losses? Do you wish your job was about getting the best coaches you can to win and beat St. Chris or whoever you guys are playing? It's just so funny because the fact that Armando Baycott went to Trinity, my perception is there must be some kind of factory. That was my impression, and I'm surprised that it's not. Yeah,
Armando Baycott, if he was 5'6" and didn't care about basketball at all would have gotten to Trinity. He's a smart guy.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't implying that. I was implying the fact that he wanted to be there.
Yeah.
Where he could have.
Yeah.
There's other great schools that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think it's one of those things that if you build it, they will come. As far as the talent is concerned, you just can't like go out and pluck the talent without something that hadn't already been built. What was the initial question before you started?
But what do you wish it was about wins and losses? Do you wish AD was about building? Yeah.
When I first got here, it was a very hard transition. And I used to kind of yearn for, can't we just do this? It's going to be so great. And like, but you can't pour all this money into one thing and then forget about the other program here, like I said. So for lack of a better phrase, I think I drank the Kool-Aid, and eventually now that is my mindset, that it is bigger than just winning, and it is even bigger than sports, and being a part of a school that's good at a lot of things. And that person who enjoys lacrosse just as much as they enjoy the robotic situation, that's a really well-rounded person that's cool to be around. And so I've bought into that whole thing about community building and it not be so focused on one thing. I mean, sports can bring a community together, that's for sure. And we showed that at Trinity, I guess, 3 years ago now when we hosted the state championship football game. By far the most people that have ever been on this campus, by far the biggest alumni turnout to any Trinity event. The pride was huge. I mean, Trinity football used to be trash, just to speak plainly. Even when I first worked here, I mean, there was nobody at the games. We weren't good. It just wasn't a thing. And now we have to host certain games off campus because our campus isn't big enough to handle a big event from a liability and safety standpoint, because it's just rocking here. So, I think our leadership sees that the sports thing is going to bring more attention, positive attention to the school than any other program probably can in just one fell swoop. So I think every private school deals with this, is how are you going to balance athletics? Are you going to go full speed ahead, or are you going to balance it with the rest of the school? And how does that affect your development and your alumni relations and things that public schools don't have to think about?
Now, I would guess, such a busy job with all those responsibilities, all those people you have to manage. Like right now, I am mostly just in sales, and I love it. I have to hit certain goals and reach those goals, and life is good. I don't have to worry about a lot of stuff. Even though most of my career, I've been CEO, and I've been I love the fact that I'm in my own world. But I could imagine you have really grown as a professional doing that. You've had to really challenge yourself. You probably learned a lot about yourself that you didn't know. So how are some of the ways you've grown as a professional since you've been AD at Trinity?
Yeah, leadership is a very interesting art form. There's many ways to skin that cat. You have to stay authentic to yourself, but you have to be smart enough to meet certain people where they are. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned, because in AD, you've got all these different constituents that you're trying to please and you're trying to collaboratively work with in a positive way. You've got the parents, you got the student athletes, you've got the other ADs within your league and state who are just as much your colleagues as anybody else. And then you've got your own bosses, your higher administration, and then the rest of the school, the teachers, and how they perceive athletics and how they support or don't support it. And so you're trying to make all of those constituents, your coaches, I forgot about the big one. You're trying to make them all happy and support all of them in the best way you can. And on any given subject or any given decision, you're going to piss off 3 of those constituencies. 2 of them are going to be whatever about it. And one of them is going to be so happy and think you're the best. And so navigating all of that within a given day, week, month of a school year can be a lot mentally. I mean, it's one of those things that keeps you up about given decisions. During COVID, I mean, that was my welcome to being an AD, was 5 months into the job, the bottom falling out and having to totally revamp the whole department. I actually saw that as a blessing, though, because I had a lot of time, especially in March and April, where really nothing was going on, to get operational things cleaned up and in place. So that was good. But yeah, I've grown as a leader big time. I'm a people pleaser by heart, and you have to just realize that's not possible. Yeah. And just keep on trudging and do what's best. Figure out what the mission of the school is and what your true north is as in your value system, and stick to that when the rubber hits the road and you've got to make a tough decision. And with all the different personalities you work with, when you're dealing with somebody one-on-one, meet them where they are. Don't make them meet you where you are. If you're a leader, I think you're going to get more out of of people, more buy-in from people, more positive behavior out of people if you meet them where they are and talk their language. So
Yeah.
basketball helps with that too, because we're very culturally diverse. So I've learned how to speak various languages within it.
Exactly. Yeah, one thing I've learned as a leader is there are sometimes limits to my charm. I mean, like you, I figure sometimes I can charm people, and these situations you're talking, three people are mad, Anna will go in there and smooth things out. And I feel like I'm the kind of person that can do things like that as well. But you do realize sometimes there is a limit to your charm. Has that ever happened to you at Trinity?
Yeah, and that's where you've got to really put your ego in check and ask for help. That's
Yeah.
another really good thing to learn in life, is knowing that you have an ego. Most athletes do.
Yeah.
When it's showing its ugly face, and when to put it in check and say, I need help with this. So there's one team mom that, of course, that'll go unnamed, that just is a tough cookie. She's a lovely woman, I think, outside of when she's dealing with her children. And I just haven't been able to get on the same page with her. So I've often tapped other people and say, can you talk to her? Because me and her just cannot see eye to eye on things. I don't think I can charm her the way, like you said, that I can other people. I think she probably thinks I'm trying to manipulate her. Like, the jig is up as far as her relationship with me. And yeah, that's when you check your ego, you ask for help, because maybe there's somebody that works right next to you that easy. So learning how to do that is important for sure.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. So, speaking of charm and parents, we talked offline about parents, and I admitted to you that as reasonable and as nice as I am, something happens when you're a sports parent, that you become this different person at times. And I can't explain it. I'm sure there's been books written about it, but does it change at all that when you're paying to go to school at Trinity, do the parents become even more, the expectations rise? And I would think, it sounds like Trinity doesn't have the culture where sports are everything. So maybe it's not quite as bad at Trinity as it could be at some places. But
Yeah.
anyway, compare parents at private school and then public school.
Yeah, I've heard that the Northern Virginia parents are worse, just hearsay. So that's started with you. Yeah. I don't know that the private school puts another layer on it. It's interesting that as many parents as I've come in contact with that have been irritated about something, no one has ever thrown the tuition thing in my face. Not once. And I'm shocked by that, because I know that they've said things that they don't mean. So I'm surprised that somebody hasn't said, and I'm paying $28,000 and this is the product that you guys are, it's never happened here. And Trinity is a very down to earth place. We like to pride on ourselves that we are growing in wealth, but not in privilege and entitlement. And I think that the school is going to make sure culturally that doesn't seep in as wealth grows. But they are difficult. I mean, I'd say that 80% of the community is lovely. And then the 20% that comes to you, 10%, it's because something happened and they're probably warranted to be upset about something. Because all these coaches are human. We're all human. Things are going to go wrong. We're going to forget about a kid, like blah, blah, blah. And then there's that 10% this is just who they are. And they probably complain to the waiter the same way they're complaining to us, whoever else they're dealing with. Those are the tougher ones because they're habitual. So, you're not done with them. All right, we fixed this problem. I'll probably never hear from Mrs. Smith again. But then, Mr. Jones, yeah, he's going to find something tomorrow to be upset about. Those are the really tough ones. And I have found that conflict with parents is a great opportunity to form a relationship with them, because oftentimes it takes a while to deal with the conflict, and you're talking multiple times. So you develop a rapport with them more so than you do the parent that would never say anything, and they're just out supporting the team. So I look at it as an opportunity to form a positive relationship with a family that can maybe give later, or just help spread the positive word about Trinity. Like, yeah, I had this problem with the coach. The AD came in, we all sat down, we figured it out, and we're in a better place because of it. So you got to look at it as an opportunity, as opposed to like oh, here we go again.
Yeah. Well, I have a friend, and I hope he's not listening, but he had a problem with the coach, and maybe legitimate. The coach is a great coach, and his son was a great player, but there are limits. Coaches have styles, or there are a lot of great players sometimes, and he went to the AD and to complain about the coach. Now, my first impulse is, I can't ever imagine that being helpful to the kid if you go over the coach's head to an AD. I would think, a parent probably should never come to you about most things, because the coaches are going to want to prove that they're human. They're going to want to prove they're right. So they're not even going to be on the side of the kid anymore. So I don't see how it's going to help. But do you have any advice to
Yeah.
parents who are thinking about going to the AD?
Well, I think a lot of parents just want to be heard by somebody, and some of them just, I need to get this off of my chest and maybe file it away in case this coach does have problem after problem after
Oh, okay.
problem. I want to be a part of that system,
Mhm.
but mostly I just want to be heard. I need to tell somebody, and I don't want to bother the coach with it because I don't want the coach to take it out of my kid. 9 out of 10 conversations I have with families, they say, my kid would be mortified if they knew that I came to you. Please keep this between us. And I do. And I listen to them, and maybe there's an action step that I need to take. But most of the time, it's just being a sounding board. And I'm happy to be that for people. These people are desperately in love with their children. They can't stand to see any type of heartache or honestly challenges put in front of them. So they just need to vent to somebody, and I can do that. I do say at the beginning of conversations, though, there's 2 things I will not talk to you about. And one of them is somebody else's child. So don't bitch about Johnny, because that's not your child, and playing time. And most people have to like, all right, shoot, well, now I got to pivot and make this not about playing time, because really, that's what it comes down to. It's not about that, I swear. Yes, it is.
It's the way he
Even in
talks to my
basketball,
son.
I know, I know. I know basketball forwards and backwards. That is a topic more than any other topic that I know really well. And that's trickling away as I get further and further from the game. But I can talk basketball. I can't weigh in on playing time on a given team because I'm not at every practice.
Yeah.
Like anyone who knows basketball knows different combinations work, different, if you're playing a zone and your child is just can't figure out how it works with the 2-3 zone, then they shouldn't be in the game. How they behaved the day before at practice, what's going on with them in a classroom where we can't reward them with playing time because they need to get this straight. There's just so many nuances that I'm not privy to. The coach's hour conversation with the assistant coach. Okay, let's try that because that's not working. I didn't hear that. So how am I supposed to tell a coach to play your child more? That's ridiculous. So let's not waste each other's time going down that path. And then with the other sports like lacrosse, I don't know lacrosse. So what are you talking about? Like, let's just not waste each other's time with those 2 topics. So
Yeah.
they hear that, they still eventually want to talk about playing time.
Yeah. Yeah. I still think about games where I think my son should have played a little bit more, but
Yeah.
I think well,
Now, did you ever go to a coach and complain or an AD?
I didn't not high school, because our high school coach, my son played soccer, and the high school coach didn't talk to parents. So it was pretty easy. We had no opportunity. And my son, lucky enough, he started every game. And even though there were times I thought the coach was being slightly unfair, he was been such an influential. I mean, they went to the state final, and he did such a great job of getting my son to play by far his best soccer he played his whole life. And I knew he loved him the way he played. So even though sometimes I felt like he should have played a little bit more, I knew this coach loved my son, and he loved, and he didn't, I'm not saying he loved all the kids, but he loved to coach soccer, and he loved to get the most out of his kids. And I just think we were lucky to have him. So no, but club, I had complained, and I'm friends with all my coaches, the ex-coaches. They still contact me. I told you offline about a previous coach had called me because he just wanted to vent about something. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I do. I was tough on coaches, but generally I think I was pretty above board. But I was trying to say though, is the passion that you feel when someone's coaching your kids. I don't even know where that comes from. Why is it so important? Why do we care so much about what our kids, how much playing time they get? Why is it so important? And I know it should be important, but why is it so important?
No, are there books written on this? Like, is it, because that's like way over my head. That's
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah,
thing,
I'm supposed to be asking you a question. I'm not
are you
supposed to be
living, are you living vicariously through your kid? Is that
Yeah.
it? Or
Yeah.
is it just like, I just can't stand to see my kid upset about something, and when they don't play, they come home upset.
Yeah.
And I get the finger pointed at coaches a ton with, my kid doesn't love the game like they used to.
Yeah, I hear
And
that
I
too.
used to sort of say, all right, well, this is the coach's fault, but is it, you know how it is, like,
Yeah.
is it my boss's fault when I come to work, whether I'm having a positive experience or not, or is it me internally?
Yeah.
So that's a complicated, I wonder if there are articles and books written about that psychology, because it's real.
exactly. Now, I'm glad you asked that, but I do want to say that I think all in all, I did more than always team dad, taking pictures.
Yeah.
And I always
Yeah.
tried to do my part. But like I did want to ask you, so when I watched the news feature in local news about your house, and I hope you don't mind me saying it was on the news, it was on Monument Avenue. One thing that struck me was, as a basketball player, you have to be pretty good with race because you're going to deal with a lot of African American players, and so you grew up, I'm sure, having a lot of friends, and but Monument Avenue is a lightning rod. I go on Facebook sometimes, and they're still arguing about those monuments. And when I was there a couple of years ago, I went to see Arthur Ashe is monument because I was a huge Arthur Ashe fan. I mean, he was,
Yeah.
I grew up, played tennis in the 70s. He was just a god, and the way he handled himself, just an amazing person. What in living on Monument Avenue, you're right there on ground zero of this tension. Richmond has a complicated relationship. What coming from Richmond, living where you live, how have you seen race relations evolve over time? Or are things getting better? When I see from Northern Virginia that they're still arguing about monuments, is that just people, on the fringe, or is that a normal kind of topic of conversation that folks will have in Richmond? And to your kids, I mean, Trinity, you have a lot of African American kids, and I'm sure kids of all races. Are the racial tensions of Richmond, I'm sure they're not perfect, but are they just like any other place?
Wow, it's an amazing topic to bring up because
That's a lot. I'm sorry if it's too much.
Oh, I love talking about it. I think in the vacuum of sports, back in the 90s, it wasn't talked about much, and it didn't feel like as much a thing. But I also understand the privilege of being from the white perspective on that, and having a couple of Black girls on the team that they seemed fine to me, but we actually talked to them. Yeah, that was really hard being, a Black person in a almost fully white school. Or we had a Muslim girl on the team that, we said the Lord's Prayer before every game. How uncomfortable was she during that thing? And then in college, we joked about race relations a lot. Like when we went to dinner, isn't it funny how the white girls order soda and the Black girls order juice? And it's like the line is in the sand in that. That was a big joke. And then as we approached 2010, of course, 12 and 16, things started to tension up. And I even had some conversations with former teammates of mine that started to get a little bit like there was tension there, and I felt it. And so maybe the national scene made that worse, and it trickled down into the localities. Richmond is a very segregated community, and it still is. Trinity has worked really hard to make sure that we are welcoming of all kinds, and that's race, that's religion, that's identity with gender and sexuality and all that stuff. And I have felt, and I only feel comfortable saying this publicly now because I'm on my way out the door, that especially with our football team, we're targeted because of it. And we've had a couple well-known private institutions in the state that have stopped playing us. And yes, we got good. And yes, it's easy to lean on it's not safe to play you all. But you can't tell me that if this team was full of white guys and white coaches, that it wouldn't be different. There's that undertone there. And so what do? You call somebody out on it. You're not playing us because all of our coaches are Black, and I know it. And then they get defensive about it. But it's definitely not where it should be in this city. The tension was very high. Now, I don't live in the city on Monument Avenue. I'm more out in the county. But when I did go on runs down in the city, it was a dangerous time to be down there. I mean, there were men walking around with AK-47s, young men that definitely should not have guns in their hands. And there was just a lot of vitriol back and forth. Sports absolutely helps that. I also think I got and I'm sorry I'm so scattered, but this is great.
The question was like 5 minutes long. So your answer is in relation to my question.
Yeah, I think my experience as being one of the only white people on a team in college helped too. Does that mean that I understand the Black experience? Of course not. But I do understand being the minority on what was mostly African American girls, and little comments that are made that you're like, I know that sounded like you wanted to be funny, but that's not really that funny, like what we call microaggressions. So that gave me a sense of empathy for being kind of othered, that has helped me as after I graduated. And I do think that I'm more culturally, I went into college like this, and I feel like now I'm like this with some of the experiences of my teammates. That I had one teammate, Latanya Blue, and who I just think the world of now. She's doing really well, that clearly had an issue with me. And I didn't know what it was back then. And we kind of had to work through it and talk about it. And she later admitted to me on an email that a white man killed her father. And that was generally her issue with me being the only white girl, or one of two white girls on the team, is just she couldn't get past that, and worked through it with therapy and all. So complicated issue. To your just general question, no, Richmond is not where it needs to be. It doesn't feel as intense as it did in 2016, but we're in 2020, of course, but we're coming up on another one, and it'll be interesting to see how it shows itself.
How did you perceive race relations at UVA? So I coming from Northern Virginia, and I was class of 84 at Robinson and 88 UVA. So I was only the 13th graduating class of Black students at UVA. So, UVA was probably, for the time, Northern Virginia was probably at the time progressive, lots of government workers, military families, and a very transient society where we didn't have old neighborhoods where the white folks live here. We had some of that, but not much of it in Northern Virginia. So when I came to UVA, I was going to the South. I was surprised at how different it was. All my friends at UVA were Black. I probably had one really close white friend that we're so close today. We're in high school. I had more white friends than Black friends, because we had many more white, students at our school than we had at Robinson. The Black students at Robinson were very close, but it wasn't many of us. So we didn't think about race in high school that much. At UVA, I thought about race every single day. But coming from Richmond, and I know it's different for athletes. You guys have a different experience. How did you perceive race relations in Charlottesville and UVA after leaving Richmond?
It seemed really segregated to me.
It still did. Yeah.
Very segregated. It seemed like if any Black person wanted to go to party, they had the party where all the Black people were, and obviously the hangouts by the bus stop and different parts on campus, where it was kind of known that was who hung out there. And even for me, I didn't socialize with many teammates outside of maybe one or two, outside of practice and games and that stuff. I went and hung out with the white people. Now, granted, admittedly, I was partying to an extent that I don't think a lot of people on my team wanted to. I very much bought into the drinking culture at UVA, which is too much, of course. So maybe that was part of it. It wasn't a racial thing, but yeah, it felt really segregated. I didn't get a sense, and again, I think this comes from the privilege of being a white person, that it was a big issue and that there was rampant racism everywhere. But I'd actually like to hear your perspective on it. I mean, yeah, we see the segregation, but was there vitriol between white and Black people? Usually college campuses, there's conflict anyway, because everyone wants to argue a bunch of, political stuff. So what did you see?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. We're gonna have to do a podcast together, because you're good at this. So my first week at UVA, I was at ROTC, and I went down there, and you have like a temporary roommate for the first week. And I remember I went across the hall, and a guy had this stereo. His name is Jackson. I can't think of his last name. And I said, "Dude, that's a beautiful stereo." He said, "Dude, don't even think about it." This was my first day at UVA, and where was he from? Halifax or somewhere way down kind of south side. And he didn't know a lot of Black guys. He was definitely headed to KA. That's where he ended up being in the fraternity. But that was like one of my first experiences there. And I remember I met there was a guy in Navy ROTC, and we became really close friends. And he was my roommate. Later on, we're still close friends to this day. But it was really disappointing. And what I had to do is I ended up playing pickup basketball at the Dell and Slaughter.
Yeah.
You get to find your people. And, I met a lot of great white folks there, and I'm not saying we hung out, because the social lives at nighttime were completely different. I mean, I couldn't go out to a rugby road fraternity and think I'm going to be dating a woman who I met there. Unless you're an athlete, it was different, but that was not the way social life was. So even if I had friends. We didn't socialize at nighttime together. We'd play basketball with friends. We might watch games together. And so it was, my life was completely segregated. And then what was interesting, I went to law school there as well, and it was less segregated in law school. And I had many more white friends there, and it just doesn't have the same feel. Maybe because it's smaller, I'm not sure. But when I came back to Northern Virginia in 91, I went right back to my old days, and all my friends, mostly white, only that there's more white folks in this area. I didn't, in other words, I didn't think about race anymore. White friends, black friends, both. It's something I didn't think about nor nearly as much when I came home. I just went right back to where I was when I left. So that was very interesting how UVA did affect me. And I still, for years, I didn't go back from UVA. So 2091, I graduated. I really did not go back and even visit really to 2000, maybe 11.
Wow.
And it wasn't really just because of that, but I think it had something probably to do with it. But then now I've reconnected. My son goes there. I do a podcast, and
Yeah.
I love my time there, but it was complicated.
That is, I think you're right too, that the athlete experience is different than general pop or whatever you call it, because we are forced to desegregate in a lot of ways within our teams, but also in the training room. And a lot of athletes get there early, and so they all kind of travel in a pack. One of my first friends there was Travis Watson, so I was doing all the things that he was doing in all the different segments he had a toe in, just because he was a popular guy. So I'm interested. That's interesting to hear from the perspective of an African-American guy that wasn't in athletics, how that looked. And I agree with the Northern Virginia thing. That's where I live now. It's so intertwined. I mean, it's like the Parade of Nations in my little townhome area, and I enjoy that. But you're right. It's probably because it's transient. I don't pretend to know the area that well yet.
Yeah. Well, one thing that was completely taboo when I was there was very little interracial dating in 1984. Only athletes, and not really that public. My son goes there now, and there seems to be a lot more of it, but not as much as I would think. It's not that public. He said, yeah, there is a lot of interracial dating, but I don't think people are that public about it. What did you see in 2004 around there?
Definitely still taboo in the early 2000s.
Right.
In fact, that's where the conflict with LaTanya and I started, was me dating Travis for a little bit, very short amount of time.
There you go. Yeah.
And I remember walking in public with him to go out to restaurants, and I'm like, this is different. Why are they looking at us like this? And he's kind of laughing because he's dealt with it a million times.
Would that happen in Richmond? Would you have had the same uncomfortableness in Richmond, dating? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm with a white female now, so that's a whole nother bag of rocks, but I don't know that anything has changed in Richmond when it comes to that. I think faces are still turning, and it's such a shame. It's 2024. Come on.
Exactly.
Who cares?
Yeah. I met briefly. I went to a wedding in the early 90s, and I met a woman from Franklin, way out in the country there. And we dated, we dated briefly. And I remember one time when I went down to Richmond, she took me to some country and western bar on the West End, or on the near Short Pump or somewhere out there. I don't remember what it was. And I just felt like, are you crazy? You're going to get me killed. And it was completely different. That wouldn't have happened in Northern Virginia. I wouldn't have even thought about my wife. We're biracial couple. And it's not something we think about very much.
Really, not
Richmond,
anymore.
What's that?
Not anymore. You don't have to think about it when you go out.
No, and I, to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't have thought about it 30 years ago that much either.
Okay.
No, because we started dating in 95, and that's about 30 years ago. Not something we thought about that much at all. As a matter of fact, I think there was a little bit of backlash when the racial politics have gotten a little bit complicated the last 7 or 8 years. There's a little more of that.
Sure.
Anyway, I don't want to completely offend you because I'm talking about all these racial issues, but I did want to ask you, where did you finally find your peoples at UVA? Since, it wasn't, the players on your team, though great teammates, socially things were different. Where did you find your people? Was it, did you have like friends like in the dorm like everybody else would? Or
I mean, obviously, we're in Richmond's an hour and 15 minutes from Charlottesville, so there's quite the Richmond population that's there already before I got there, and then of course people in my class. So it started off with Richmond connections, and then that bolstered a little bit further. I did make some connections with other athletes in the training room. I think of a softball player right now that I'm still in touch with to this day and is a very good friend of mine. And she was in the old dorms, which of course was the better place to be. And she had
Of course.
plenty of, yeah, way better than the new dorms. Lots of friends on her hallway that ended up being sorority girls that I became good friends with. So, but I think the main thing just to get me going socially was the Richmond connections. And that's the low hanging fruit when you're an hour and 15 minutes away and know people. And I wasn't even that great friends with some of the people here in Richmond, but it's like, hey, I know you. You want to go out? You know? Let's
Exactly.
roll.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Debbie Ryan, if you don't mind. Debbie Ryan, she was a holdover from the AIAW days. I mean, she was really
I don't
old
even know what that
school.
is.
What's that?
I don't even know what that is.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Oh my God. So the NCAA, I believe, just started regulating women's college sports in 82 or 83. Before that, women had their own organization. It was called AIAW. They had
Okay.
completely different rules, some good, some bad, but it was completely different than NCAA. And I think
Yeah.
82 or 83, NCAA became to do both. That's how far we've come. I mean, yeah. So when that Kathy Grimes, who I mentioned to you, who I've interviewed, she's from my area. She's a legendary player, the first great player from UVA. I believe when she started there, it was AIAW. And then, I mean, the rules are completely different. Some of them are completely random rules that they had to do. So Debbie Ryan was coaching at that time. And you're talking about a time when at the athletic department, this is actually interesting. Back then, women ran all the athletic departments at all the colleges. So at every college, a woman would run the athletic department. So when Title IX happened and the athletic departments combined, well, then the man was over the whole thing. So it was interesting because when Title IX was great in a lot of ways, but it was unfortunate for women who were in administration because all those women administrators around the country, they kind of got folded into the athletic department. And then the NCAA kind of separately, though, started regulating women's basketball and all sports. So anyway, Debbie Ryan was from those days. She was old school, and she was incredibly successful, as you know. When you got there, you guys were hanging in there. You're definitely fighting for those NCAA bids. You definitely had some success, but it must have been a very different Debbie Ryan than the early days, because when I was there, she completely walked on water. So what were your memories of Debbie Ryan? And you guys are really you guys are fighting to hang in there at this point.
Yeah, when I first came in, we were actually preseason number 9. So there was a lot of hope for that season, and we did not end up in the top 10, of course. But also when I first came in, this is when Debbie was fighting pancreatic cancer. So
Oh my gosh.
first team meeting that we had on, day 2 of everyone being on grounds, not campus, of course, a conference call, and she was in the hospital. And the first thing she said is, we're going to get to the Final Four, and this is how we're going to do it. And I mean, didn't have the woe is me tone. I'm in here fighting what most would believe to be a deadly disease. She beat it that year, which was incredible to beat that type of cancer. And she was tired, and I remember having to leave games to use the restroom and come back. And so that was my first interaction with her, was as a cancer patient, other than, of course, the recruiting things, which mostly was done by her assistants. So she was weak that year. And maybe that was the beginning of the decline of, she walks on water or whatever, but still an amazingly strong figurehead. She's a very tough woman. She made sure everything the men got, we got. When I was there was the beginning of those shooting machines. So when that appeared in the gym, it was like, we're not sharing that. We're going to get another one because the men got it. We were flying charter and private jets, just like the men were. And she would be vocal about this, which I think was really cool, that it taught we as young women, like, equality is a thing, and you have to speak up and you have to fight for it. So that was really cool. She could be polarizing in practice because she was sometimes mean and hard on us. And she'd have a lot of girls walking out of practice like, blah, blah, blah about Debbie. But at the end of the day, we also knew that she was fully behind us in every aspects of life. And she's proven that as we've graduated. If I had to constructively criticize the coaches who have come after Debbie at UVA, there's not much of an alumni thing. And maybe I just don't they have my address wrong or whatever, but I'm not reached out to a lot. And when Debbie was there, alumni would come through practices all the time. In the locker room, everyone's name, whoever played for her at UVA, was printed or painted on the top above our lockers. And it was very much felt like a family thing. They started a program where you were in touch with an alum and kind of could just be your mentor and somebody to talk about the woes and hardships of being a college athlete. And I don't know that that stuff's in place. If it is, I'm not privy to it, but she did a really good job with that. And then look, I've been out of there for 20 years, and she most recently called me 2-3 weeks ago. I've got a sister that's fighting cancer right now, and she's been checking in the whole way.
Oh,
And
sorry to hear that.
hey, yeah, I appreciate that. If you need to get in at UVA for whatever reason, let us know. And she's in touch with my dad probably more than I am with her about it. So she cares. Every coach wants to be known as the person that keeps in touch with their student athletes later on in life, but very few do it. And she is one of them. So for that, just outside of the whole basketball thing, I think the world of her. It was a vocation for her. It wasn't a job. It was her whole being. She dove everything she had into it, gave so much. She cared so desperately and deeply, and she was competitive as all get out, like very competitive.
Was it tough on her though that they weren't having the same level of success? I mean,
Had to have been.
what's that?
Had to have been.
Yeah, because I mean, and if you look at the '80s, they maybe lost 2 or 3 games a year, and then you guys are right around beating 500 usually, but it's tough. It had to be really tough on her.
I could tell it was wearing on her.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's just, you roll the dice when you bring in certain recruits. And if somebody comes in and has a virus with them, quote unquote, and it spreads throughout the program, that can be tough to recover from quickly. And I think that there were a few of those. I'm not saying I was the model like that team. I was doing things socially that I think any college coach would not prefer you do, but it was so diverse within that team culturally that it was really hard to bring us together chemistry wise. And that's a beautiful thing for all of us as we go on to the next stages of our lives, that we experience the girl from Turkey that was Muslim and LGBTQ, and the girl from Australia, and the 2 Russians who culture is way different there. The really rich girl from Massachusetts, Brenna McGuire, Al McGuire's granddaughter, was there. And then
cool.
the person from inner city Baltimore or inner city Oakland. I mean, that was all together, and it just didn't fit when we were there. And that's no one's fault. That's just the roll of the dice recruiting.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people that don't understand athletics really deep down think it's all about the talent and how that comes together. But it's so much more than that, personality wise, and just, do you really care about the person next to you? And if you really desperately love that teammate next to you, it's going to show out on the court. And if you just like, I like them, that translates. It really does. It's like this cool phenomenon in sports. And that's why you find championship teams are people that are like, just love each other and hang out with each other all the time. And they do for years to come, because of just this natural chemistry that happens that you can't just put it in a test tube and make it happen.
You can't teach chemistry unless you're a Trinity chemistry teacher, I guess. But you can't. Yeah, it's hard. Well, just moving backwards briefly, and I know I'm taking way too much of your time here. How important to your life was your state championship run? Now, they write movies about state championship runs, Hoosiers and others, Hoop Dreams, and for guys, we kind of dwell on these things. This is what these podcasts are all about. But I found in my time, women tend to not dwell on old stuff as much. They kind of move forward better than men do. But personally, what did your state championship run when you guys overcame an early exit in the state tournament your junior year against the great Carol Lawson to beat 2 Northern Virginia teams, Mount Vernon coached by Kenny Farmer, and then Robinson coached by Dwight Trimmer, 2 legendary Northern Virginia coaches. And I mean, I think at the time it's fair to say we were the dominant force in women's and girls high school basketball. What has that meant to your life? The fact that you won that state championship and you were the captain?
Yeah, I can answer that either way, depending on how I'm feeling that day, because I don't want to put too much value into a silly championship. When you look at, like I said, I've got a sister who's battling cancer. Like there's way bigger things. I think we all go through those spots in life where we realize like sports is just like, it's kind of just a game, but then on another day, I talk about how it brought a community together, how it brought very different people. Like we had a soccer player on there, two soccer players on there that were really didn't care much about basketball, but were very important in that run. This Muslim girl who made the 3-pointer to beat Mount Vernon, just that we had this natural chemistry and this beautiful run that happened together. And then to go 31-0. So to say I wrapped up a season of my life and I don't have any regret to look back at that season. Damn, if that would have just happened this way, or I would have made that shot, or that coach hadn't have made that decision. I don't have to think about that. And I think there's a lot of former athletes that have to dwell on that stuff for like the rest of their lives. So yeah, it does mean something. It's bigger than a game. We played in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is 2 hours away. And like everyone came. I mean, people who like students at Midlothian High School who their parents being in Lynchburg would have been a great opportunity to throw a party at their house. It came anyway because they wanted to be a part of it. I mean, it was a really big deal. I remember before we left for the Final Four, I was in English class and there was a student teacher there, bless her heart. So she's, just on the ball. Student teachers are always that way. And I'm talking about the basketball game. And she looks over at me and says, Anna, what you're talking about more important than what we're talking about here in class? And I looked over to the real teacher and the real teacher goes, it kind of is. Made everybody laugh, and that poor student teacher. But it was a big deal throughout the halls of Midlothian at the time. And we actually had a 20th reunion of it. I guess it was right before COVID that they did it. Like it was January of 2020. And 12 out of 13 girls came back, and the only person that couldn't come back was about to take her MCAT out in Colorado, and 13 out of 13 sets of parents came back to be at that game and be recognized. So that's clearly it meant something to all of us. The principal was there, the janitor was there, one of our bus drivers was there. I mean, the softball coach, the volleyball coach, they all came back and even came to the restaurant afterwards. So yeah, it was a big deal. And I don't think that there's, I'm gonna pull a number out of the sky, 3 or 4 months that go by for this entire 22 years that someone hadn't brought it up. I mean, people just care about it. From an individual standpoint, no, it doesn't mean much to me. And that's where guys want to just talk about their careers. And you look at my Facebook or my Instagram, there is absolutely no evidence that I was a college or high school athlete. And you look at some former really good college athletes that I could name, UVA guys, it's still all over it. And it's like, you are almost 50 years old. What are you still showing highlights of yourself?
I know.
I don't know. That might be an identity thing, an ego thing that women just don't carry with them as much. But from an experiential thing, of course, that run mattered. And
yeah, we're real bad about, living in those memories to the detriment of, almost, every other thing. It's funny because when I saw you on Ballin, Virginia, Larry's podcast, your name came back to me and I was like, wow. So, I love the state tournament. So my sister Robinson won her sophomore and junior year, they won the state. She was a point guard. And I went, and they used to have the regional tournaments at Robinson back then for Northern Virginia, which was a big event, a big social event. 6,000 people. So that whole process was really big to me. So between like 78 and I think 2008, I went to every single state tournament and I loved them. Every year, that was my 4 days. I'd have other vacations, but that was 4 days I would spend in Richmond or Lynchburg or Roanoke, wherever they were having it. I didn't really stop going until they divided the classifications up and they kind of watered down the competition. Unfortunately, it kind of lost its magic. But when you won it, there was only 3 champions, and it was really big, especially to beat a Northern Virginia team, because I think we'd won maybe 12 of the first 20 or 15 of the first 20 or something crazy like that. But look, I wanted to ask you. I mentioned earlier today about your Bridges of Madison County Titanic moment when you found letters in your attic, even letters that a person who lived there before, who was related to the person who was receiving the letters, had never found. Can you tell us that story? It's a pretty cool story.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I had a breakup, and so I'm cleaning stuff out of a closet, and we had had a dresser in front of this door for the entire time that we'd lived in the house. So I don't even think that I registered that there was a door back there. So the dresser was moving out, and I see this door, and I'm very into OCD cleaning, and so I'm like, I gotta get in here and I gotta see what's in there. Well, I open it up and it's just junk left and right. Long story short, I finally get to the back and there's these box of letters, and it looks straight out of the notebook because it's a ton of letters. It's like, I'd say 200 letters, and seemingly all addressed to the same address. And there was some different ones in there. And I took a picture of it and I sent it to like a good friend group text and to my parents. And both of them immediately were like, you have to find this person. Like, somebody is going to want to look at those letters. This is not something you put out in the fire pit and light on fire. So my sisters came over. My sisters are twins. They came over like that weekend, and we started drinking some wine, and they're like, we want to read the letters. And I'm like, it seems very private to me. And I was like, screw it, let's start reading it. And then I found out that it was like a love story. And that's when I was like, I have to follow up with all, like, when I put it on Facebook, I mean, comment after comment, and it started to get overwhelming with how all these people wanted to put on their Sherlock Holmes hat and figure out who it was. Well, after my sisters and I found out that it was a love story, we finally found the grandchildren of this woman and this man who had been corresponding. But not before the local news said, we want to help. And they came over and they did this story, and it ended up being, of course, on the local news. That story was cool. And then it ended up being on CNN and ABC News, and ended up on Kelly Clarkson. After Kelly Clarkson, I was done, because the process of going on those shows is insane. And I'm, of course, not getting paid anything. Like, several meetings with the producers, and I don't think you should wear that shirt. And we got to make sure the lighting is well. And don't say
wear
that.
your hat?
Yeah, they wouldn't let me wear a hat too. Truly, it was incredible, the process. But I had gotten calls from Inside Edition after that, and I was like, I'm done. The letter thing is really cool. It did warm my heart to connect the grandchildren with these people that were writing the letters, because they had passed. And I think they passed in like 2008 or something like that. And the side of the family that was on, they hadn't had a lot of communication with. They described their relationship with their father as fraught. So I don't think they talked to him much. And this was that dude's parents. So like I said on the little news clip that maybe you read or saw, if it was my grandparents, like, oh my God, can you imagine reading the love story between your grandparents over the years? I guess this guy was military. She was a teacher in Richmond. He played baseball in the Yankees organization for a while after he was out of the military. Like, it was just they clearly were smitten with each other.
Yeah. There's something about letters. We've really lost something. And just what we've gained in email and Facebook, and the constant, we're always in communication with everyone we've ever loved or liked, or even not liked so much. But those days of writing something and waiting a week or two for a response, like when I went to UVA, we wrote letters, and I didn't have a phone in my room, and you'd write a letter and you'd wait 2 weeks, and you couldn't wait to see that letter, and you'd read it over and over again. So therefore, when you wrote a letter, you would really put a lot of thought into what you wrote, because it was going to be poured over and over again. So those days are gone. So I'm really it's really fascinating to me that you understood how important that was, and that you took the time, having just gone through a move, you get in those rhythms of just throwing stuff away, and you're like, that's one of the first things you can throw away is someone else's junk. And I'm just so glad you took the time to do that.
Yeah, I've got that side of me. That's something I'm proud to brag of, is that I like to think I am someone that has depth in that way, in the human connection thing. That means a lot to me.
It's obvious you have a lot of that. Well, look, Anna, this has been great. I did want to ask one last question, and then I'll let you go. I went way longer than I usually go.
Okay.
I want to ask you, what's next for you? I know you mentioned moving to Northern Virginia, and but yet you're still working in Richmond for now. What other kinds of goals and things do you want to get into?
I'm glad you asked this connection, because you talked about how your business does well because of UVA connection. So let me talk about mine. I'm actually going down the entrepreneur route. Speaking of that house on Monument, in order to make my relationship work, I started to rent out that house, and I decided to go short-term rental instead of long-term lease. So I've gotten in the world of Airbnbs and Vrbo, and my own direct booking site, and I've built business around co-hosting other people's investment properties, doing that for them so they can have passive income and tax breaks and all that stuff that comes with real estate. And I've enjoyed the process, of building business, because I'm in education. I never thought that would be something that I would do. So I've spent my time on 95 podcast, audiobooks, learning about the ins and outs of that. And then how the short-term world has come into kind of the layman. You don't need these big corporate property management systems anymore because of Airbnb and Vrbo and all the software integration that you can use. I like worlds that combine blue collar and white collar and introvertedness and extrovertedness, and that checks all the boxes for me. So yeah, I'm starting to co-host short-term rental properties. So if anybody's got that vacation home or investment home and wants it to be passive income because the short-term rental market's booming, that's APs Character is what I call it. Can take care of it for you.
Well, I'll put your website in the comments,
great.
and also and the headers as well. When you say blue collar, that means you're doing a lot of work yourself on these houses, aren't you?
So for the one that I owned, yeah. I mean, that house was not safety regulation and needed some tender loving care.
Right.
We do have a part of it that does design and furnishing. So yeah, we put together furniture. I'm not the handyman or the HVAC guy, but yeah, we use our hands for some of the stuff, and I enjoy that stuff, especially with the property that I own, and hopefully we'll own more, building capital with some other people's property to buy my own maybe beach house and do that. Yeah, that's where the hand stuff comes in.
It sounds like an amazing business, and I'm sure it's going to be incredibly successful. Hey, look, Anna, it's so nice. It's so nice to meet you. I've really enjoyed this chat. Obviously, you've had an amazing experience. You know tons about high school sports, youth sports, and I'm sure more than you ever wanted to know.
Yeah.
But I mean, you could write books about this. So it's you're a great person to talk to, and also your achievements in sports are just incredible. If I could have been a state champion, a player of the year, it would be a dream. So you've done everything. 4-year starter at a great program. So just an amazing record. I'm so glad I met you.
And I'll tell you what, Julian, as I take a break from sports, I got a feeling I'm going to have an itch. So if I ever want to coach in Northern Virginia, you're going to have to direct me to the girls program that it's the happening one. I could see myself getting back into it, especially in a town where I don't know anybody. I think that would be really fun, because in Richmond, it's like, that referee, or, that coach's ego. And just to kind of get back into the game in its raw form without having these preconceived notions of all the personalities that are around it, I think could be really fun. So don't count me out of that area.
Oh God, we'll be knocking on your door. And I mean, it's an amazing girls basketball scene in Northern Virginia. It's always has been.
Yeah.
One of the first hotbeds in the country, and it still is. So yeah, I'm sure you'll have no problem finding a home when that moment comes. Just send me a text or a message. So,
that's good.
Yeah. So anyway, look, I know you're working, so it's great. Hopefully soon we can even meet in person.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me. This was a fun chat.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. Nice meeting you.
All right, have a good
Enjoy
one.
the rest of the day. All right.